afternoon. As chair, I now call to order the April 10th, 2025 meeting of the Equity Committee of the Board of Education of Baltimore County. In accordance with Board Policy 8311, the chair of a committee, at their discretion and after consultation with the staff liaison, may convene an in-person committee meeting. Otherwise, all committee meetings will be held electronically. Today's meeting is being held virtually and broadcast through Microsoft Teams. In order to efficiently conduct this meeting, committee members will state their name before speaking. Ms. Seabolt, please call the roll of board members to determine the presence of a quorum of the committee.
Good afternoon, everyone. Ms. Chikakalu.
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Harvey. Ms. Delusky.
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Frempong.
Present.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Seabolt. Would you now please call the roll of staff members on the Equity Committee participating in today's meeting?
Yes. Ms. Charlie Green. Mr. Handy.
Present.
And Ms. Myers.
Present.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Seabolt. The first item on the agenda is follow-up on suspension snapshot from the March 13th, 2025 Equity Committee meeting. And for that, I call on Mr. Douglas Handy.
Thank you, Chair Frempong. I appreciate the opportunity to come back to you all to talk about our previous topic, which was the suspension snapshot. I just want to do a brief follow-up based on some questions that came from the committee. There was one question about disproportionality by race in regards to the discretionary categories. And another question was about students that repeated in certain offense categories. And just wanted to speak briefly to this about the response from staff, and then also what we do to prevent suspensions altogether. So a lot of it does rest with our multi-tier system of supports, or MTSS for short. MTSS is coordinated from the central office level by our Department of Student Support Services. So if we look at what controls exist there and what structures exist there, that's how we respond when we see the disproportionality. And it's also the center point of the work that we're doing to make sure students are not repeating in the behaviors that result in the consequences, and that students are supported, also that staff has the capacity to respond appropriately to behaviors. And that's where my team will often work with MTSS teams to address problematic behaviors within schools. So just wanted to give a brief update on that. When I went back and looked at the data that we shared last week, you can certainly see some indicators of disproportionality, and just want to reiterate that this is ongoing work happening at each school level, and then supports are brought in from central office to support schools, principals, instructional leadership teams in addressing situations that may lead to suspensions, knowing that we are working to keep students in schools to make sure they are available for learning. So wanted to share that update on our suspension snapshot topic. With that, I'll turn it back over to Ms. Frempong.
Thank you, Mr. Handy. I'm sorry, I thought there was an echo. Thank you, Mr. Handy, for that update and clarification and the follow-up. We appreciate that. Are there any questions or comments that anyone would like to speak to regarding the update? Okay, so seeing none, the next item on the agenda is to follow up on engaging all communities with the board and BCS from the March 27th, 2025 Equity Committee meeting with the Equity Advisory Council. And for that, I call on Mr. Handy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So with this topic, this was brought up with our Equity Committee and Equity Council. Really wanted to make sure we were building some continuity here with this topic. So it is a topic that the Equity Advisory Council will continue to explore. Again, with the goal of bringing in more voices, more perspectives, more lived experiences that can inform the work of the board, can give the board a wider range of views, if you will, of what community members are experiencing. And I just wanted to reiterate with the Equity Committee that I'm looking for any communities or organizations that you all would like to connect with more. Just want to be a liaison to help make those connections the best I can. So, I'll be working with the council to bring in more voices, more perspectives, and just wanted to offer to do the same for anyone, individuals, organizations, communities that the Equity Committee is looking to connect with, want to be a part of making those connections as well. So if there are, organizations of now, entities of now, certainly we'll take that information and then just ongoing want to make myself available to work in that regard. So thank you, Ms. Rimbaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Handy. And of course, we appreciate your dedication and your work with this effort. So are there any questions or comments in regard to this update about the Engaging All Communities for Mr. Handy? Any questions or comments?
Yes, this is board member Chike Kalu.
Go ahead, Ms. Chike Kalu.
Yes, I know you were there, Chair Femprong, at the joint meeting with the Area Education Advisory Council meeting. And I was just wondering if with the Equity Advisory Council and the Equity Committee for the Board of Education, if I guess to engage more community members, kind of having a similar joint style meeting with students seeking to provide, I guess, more input and clarity onto equity policies in their school systems and schoolhouses.
So thank you, Ms. Chike Kalu. I just wanted to make sure, could you repeat? I just want to make sure I got your question. Could you just repeat?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Sorry, I was just referencing yesterday's Area Education Advisory Council joint meeting. So I was wondering if there could just be a way similarly to how the board has the joint meeting with the Equity Council to see if it could also be how the Area Education Advisory Council had kind of an open meeting for students to come. They had at least one student from each region in Baltimore County giving their perspective on the questions that they pose, but in this context, equity. And I was just wondering, could that be a possibility as well to leverage student voice?
Okay, thank you for that question. I appreciate that. Certainly, I know the council is always, this is the third year the council's really been, I think it's the third or fourth year we've had the council. We've always had at least one student representative. We just added one recently. We've added three we've invited. One was there with us when the council actually met yesterday. And I think I'd like to connect with that student and help build that network and do exactly what you mentioned, Ms. Chike Kalu. So I will talk to our other council members, but certainly using our student members to help take the lead on doing just what you described to get more student voices in an open forum. So thank you for that suggestion. I will work towards that.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Okay. Ms. Teleski says you had a quick comment.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Handy. So in response to Ms. Chika Kalu's comment, that's a wonderful suggestion. I know that I was not at the meeting last night, but the students that attend the meetings really have a lot of really important insight into what's going on in their schools in terms of academics and socially, et cetera. So that's a wonderful suggestion. And I just want to thank you, Mr. Handy, I know I had sent you a list of groups for possible engagement and connection. So, I just want to thank you for following up. And I know a lot of the groups that have come to the board meetings that I put in that email, you said you already have the relationships with, which is wonderful. And, for the opportunity to build relationship with some of those groups that we have not yet had outreach with, that would be certainly a wonderful opportunity as well.
Thank you, Mr. Lusky. Yes, and I will go back and again. Of course, I work with colleagues, within the district to on that outreach. But I will continue to look at the list you sent, and then, like you said, looking to bring in folks that we have not heard from. So, thank you for that comment.
Thank you, Ms. Chike-Kalu and Ms. Delusky. I was able to attend the meeting yesterday with the student panel for the advisory, and I think it's wonderful that the advisories come together and do a joint meeting so that it is a meeting that's totally dedicated to student voice. There were questions and comments that ranged from academics, mental health, support, and just the idea of they talk about having an adult in the building that you can trust. So definitely was some wonderful insights that we learned from our students, and I think that's something that we can work with Mr. Handy to look at for planning and seeing how we could do something similar for one of our meetings. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is disproportionality and special education. And for that, I call on Ms. Allison Myers.
Good afternoon. Nice to see everyone this afternoon. So I am going to be talking about actually significant disproportionality and special education. So we can go to the next slide. To just kind of start and center us in where this falls into our work within the Department of Special Education, as one of our school year 20 for our strategies around our improvement and our strategic roadmap, addressing disproportionate identification and placement of Black African American students and improving policies and procedures for all historically marginalized students is one of our focuses for impact under services, which is on identified in orange on that slide. Next slide, please. And then similar to that is the measurement that we look at is that we have under our services identifying that we want to decrease that disproportionate placement of Black African American students through improved placement procedures developed in summer of FY24 and rolled out in Q1. Before I move to the next slide, what I want to highlight as I look to the data on the next slide is that when we speak of special education and significant disproportionality, we actually are focused on just beyond placement. We focus on several areas, which we'll see is that identification, placement, and then suspension. So interesting how when I was hearing the update, how you'll see the intersection as we talk through this work today. Next slide, please. So this is actually our report from MSDE that we receive every year related to significant disproportionality. I'm going to talk through this a bit. So significant disproportionality under IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, requires states to collect and examine data to determine if significant disproportionality based on race and ethnicity is occurring in the state and the local education agencies of the state with respect to three areas which I just referenced. Point A being identification of children with disabilities, including the identification of children with a particular impairment, is that descriptive word. B, the placement in a particular educational setting of children, which you then see on your left-hand side under placement where it says ages 6 to 21. And then C, the incidence, duration, and type of disciplinary actions, including suspensions and expulsions. On this one, IDEA does not, however, define significant disproportionality. The regulations do not explicitly define the term, and so they require states to use a standard method for analysis of disproportionality. In Maryland, we identify disproportionality as set at a 2.0 as its risk ratio threshold to identify significant disproportionality. So in Maryland, we compare our risk ratios over a 2-year academic period to determine if reasonable progress is being made. To achieve reasonable progress, which you see down on the right-hand side of your screen with the light color pink and the darker colored pink. To achieve reasonable progress, the risk ratio must show a reduction of 0.15 if the ratio falls between 2.0 and 4.0, and 0.5 if that ratio is greater than 4.0. So looking at this, for example, yes, I absolutely can. Thank you for that reminder. I appreciate it, especially when it's kind of complicated things. So thank you, Ms. Rampong. An example, when we look at our data in 22-23, Baltimore County Public Schools identified Black African-American students with an intellectual disability at 2.27 times the rate compared to students with disabilities identified with an intellectual disability in all other racial or ethnic categories. So you can see that under the column for Black African-American, that top row, next to intellectual disability, you see a darker colored pink, which is referencing that 2.27 number. The risk ratio for Black African-American students identified with an intellectual disability dropped to 2.11 in 23-24, which resulted in a negative 0.16 or a decrease of 0.16. Therefore, you see that under the 23-24 column, reasonable progress is considered achieved because that is then showing us at the ratio as a lighter pink color. So not significantly disproportionate any longer, but still disproportionate. So that's showing from the 22-23 to the 23-24 data. Conversely, if you slide down under discipline, in 22-23, Baltimore County imposed out-of-school suspensions of greater than 10 days on Black African-American students with disabilities at a 2.36 times the rate compared to students with disabilities from all other racial ethnic categories. In 23-24, the risk ratio for out-of-school suspensions greater than 10 days of Black African-American students with disabilities dropped to 2.31. While it resulted in a 0.05 decrease, reasonable progress was not achieved since the decrease was not at least a 0.15 in this category. It right now remains the sole category of significant disproportionality for BCPS. So you can see again for the 22-23 column, we are identified as significant disproportionality for intellectual disability at the top. And then at the bottom where you'll see that where we are now the significant disproportionality with the out-of-school suspension for greater than 10 days. Another area that we would highlight in here as an area that we would continue to monitor are the number of Asian students with disabilities placed in a regular class less than 40%. The risk ratio for this group was 1.78 in school year 22-23, which you see on that very first column under Asian, and then the top bar there of that regular class less than 40%. The risk ratio for this group was, as I said, 1.78 in 23 and 1.99 in 24. If that trend were to continue, the risk ratio may be over the 2.0 threshold at the end of this year and show up in our next year's report. Then this would be an at-risk category because while it wouldn't, it would be an at-risk, which would mean we don't technically have to address it. However, we would, and I'll talk about that. But it would have been because it's not greater than 2 consecutive years, but it's an area that we would want to watch closely. I think we'll go to the next slide. Thank you. So there's a requirement, local school systems identified as having a significant disproportionality are required to spend 15% of our federal Part B allocation, our special education funds, on preventative measures to interrupt this disproportionality. We take a very comprehensive approach to this through what is called comprehensive coordinated early intervening services to address those root causes of that significant disproportionality. At Baltimore County, we have worked to build that infrastructure around various components, which I'll talk about in a minute, to allow us to put proactive supports into place while also being responsive to the areas of disproportionality. So our comprehensive approach to this work is that we have taken the 15% of the funds that are required and then built out different components of infrastructure that are able to then be responsive to what may come up in our data, which is what we've talked about. An example of that being that although we were significantly disproportionate for that identification of intellectual disability for Black African American students last year, and then we are no longer identified as that significant disproportionate, we'll continue to work on that work. And we've added in, of course, the continuous work around suspension, although suspension is now moving into next year where we are significantly disproportionate. So building out that infrastructure allows for that flexibility with regards to how we are kind of able to use those funds and then focus our efforts accordingly. Next slide, please. So the first of these kind of infrastructural supports that we'll talk about are the comprehensive support teams, or our CST teams. There are 4 teams that have been created within our system. Elementary, there are 2 teams, and secondary, there is 1. And then we have 1 team that's cross grade level. These teams are comprised of a specialist and 2 resource teachers, that focus on multi-tiered systems, as Mr. Handy was kind of referencing, for both behavior and academics. And that's really critical to this work because we realize that academics and good instruction are linked to also a decrease in behavior. It's engagement with students, it's how they're accessing instruction, et cetera. So that's a large piece, is that when we talk about comprehensive systems, is that it's across both behavior and academics. These teams are assigned to the Division of Schools executive directors, as well as student support services. The other thing you'll notice as I'm talking through this is that we've been very deliberate in our structures around our efforts around significant disproportionality, that it's across the system. So although special education sits in the Division of Curriculum and Instruction, a lot of the efforts that I'll talk about are actually in the Division of Schools. So the Division of Schools executive directors, we cross and we collaborate in order for this work to be comprehensive and focused. So those teams allow for embedded coaching for teachers in schools, working with data collection, looking at targeted areas, and again, being able to be flexible with regards to what are those focus areas, either in that school specific, all still related to those areas of significant disproportionality, either that we have been identified as significantly disproportionate or areas that we know we need to continue to work in order to continue to make gains to not be significantly disproportionate. And then again, these work to with intentional building of those multi-tiered systems of support in school buildings. Next slide. The other kind of area that we focus our efforts on is the infrastructure of our student support teams. So we have focused on that teaming and screening process through SST and 504 teams. So student support teams and a 504 are actually the general education side of the house when we think of this. Again, falling under Division of Schools. These are students that have not been identified with a disability related to special education, but may have some other level of need. The student support team can be held to look at and be responsive to student need, to identify appropriate services, and really, in a lot of ways, prevent the need, hopefully prevent the need for specially designed instruction or special education services. It also allows, if we're doing that process right, to allow for appropriate identification. One of the areas that we have to continuously lead into is that we also want to make sure that we are appropriately identifying, that we don't have a student group that may need to be identified for services that for some reason is not, and vice versa, that we have a student group that may be being overly identified for services. So really looking at those multi-tiered systems, building out the infrastructure of our student support teams to ensure that Those structures are in place, that school teams are supported with building out their SST processes in their buildings, that 504 teams are running really, really well in order to support. Again, this supports all those areas. That's the discipline, that's ensuring appropriate identification as well. The other thing to highlight around the SST and 504 is the work with ensuring that we traditionally did not have, or the last few years have not had kind of the layered support of resource teachers that could support this work. So by using the CCIS funds, those comprehensive coordinated early intervention supports, part of that 15%, we've been able to build out that team so that there are resource teachers that are in buildings being able to support with that structure of ensuring that school teams feel comfortable with ensuring that they're using that structure and not just going to IEP team. A pattern we saw happening was that a student may have shown some need and they immediately would refer to the IEP team, which is that special education IEP team, to develop the supports and services and maybe assessments instead of sticking with that SST process and going through that. And that's, we really want to make sure that we're deliberate about ensuring that you start with that SST process, unless there's data that would, obviously indicate otherwise that it could go to IEP team, but really making sure that we're being diligent about our efforts to ensure, again, appropriate assessment and identification of students. Next slide, please. Early childhood supports is another area where we have focused our efforts. So we all know the importance of early childhood education, and that importance of early childhood, really building up, again, the infrastructure and support for our youngest learners in order to ensure that we have the appropriate supports and services for our kiddos. And again, that if we're able to intervene early, then we may not need to go to that special education route. At the same time, ensuring that students that do have needs, that they receive those needs. And if that does mean special education, that's always appropriate. That may be appropriate, but just being very deliberate and making sure that we're clear on supporting our students so they're getting what is appropriate for them. So we were able to expand the Department of Early Childhood. So we have had a director over the years, as well as a couple of resource teachers. But with our CCIS funds, we've been able to expand to multiple specialists who are then able to be zone aligned to support both pre-K and kindergarten. Really excited about this work that's been done with pre-K expansion, and really excited about we're kind of moving to that supports, even moving towards kindergarten in this coming year, with ensuring that in collaboration with the Department of Special Education and Early Childhood, remembering that the Department of Special Education, that falls from birth up. So our birth to 5 group, our infants and toddlers, with collaboration with that early childhood support to ensure that we're supporting both pre-K and K. We've been able to increase professional learning and then coaching and support for our general education pre-K and K teachers. We actually have an upcoming kindergarten, it's called K Forward, Kindergarten Professional Learning Series that's running for all kindergarten teachers. Again, general education kindergarten teacher, professional learning that's coming up in May that we're really excited about, that is done in collaboration with early childhood. And again, using those resources from CCIS and focusing on instruction, on some tiered supports. We're actually focusing, one of the sessions is on our multilingual learners. You can see how this is a really comprehensive approach, and not much of what I'm saying is related to special education. It's all those general education components. Next slide, please. Before I get to the focused engagement, the other part I do want to highlight related to special education is we do have also a team within the Department of Special Education that supports CCIS around that eligibility component. So we do know that that is an area that we continue to have to focus to not only ensure that our students identified appropriately, but also that the disability they're identified for is appropriate based on assessment data. There have been patterns within our system of maybe students transitioning from other jurisdictions, where when we're able to look at that and that come in identified as an intellectual disability, when we look at the data and work with school teams and make sure that the assessments are aligned with the standards that we see as appropriate for students, may have seen that really they may have been a student with a specific learning disability, maybe really significant, but maybe not an intellectual disability. disability. The other one that we really continue to watch, while we watch all, but closely, is emotional disability, ensuring that we want to make sure that there are supports and services in place, and are they is it appropriate that they're identified as a student with an emotional disability? Maybe it's a specific learning disability and they have some behavior needs. But again, just really wanting to take a comprehensive approach. And that component of it and that work is something that is reviewed and supported by the Department of Special Education. So while we fund these other things across the system with the funds, a lot of it doesn't live within the Department of Special Education. Moving to this next component is this focused engagement. So focused engagement around the family. So this is probably these next few slides some of you have seen before. Some of what we've talked through is about the expansion of our family engagement efforts. That also is its own layer of focus area for our Department of Special Education and our strategic roadmap, is that we know we have a lot of work to do around our family support. We have had the opportunity through our CCIS funds to be able to expand that team, birth to 21. So we have folks that are focused on our birth group. And that's really where we started, that birth to 3. They've been more robust with our parent engagement efforts over the years, and then have expanded that up. We now have in-person and a virtual resource center. We've really focused on increased IEP chair training this year in particular, knowing that with the addition of those IEP facilitators in our elementary schools, the opportunity for really doing focused professional learning with them on parent engagement efforts, wanting to ensure that resources are making it to families. They are our first line with families for support, and we want to ensure that they are getting all of the good work that's happening and opportunities with regards to family engagement, that it's making it to our families. And then really working on our increased collaboration with the Special Education Citizens Advisory Committee. We are very excited about, we have 3 chairs of our CCAC who are very engaged parents that are really focused on and hold us accountable for wanting to engage with families in a way kind of more robust than we have kind of previously. So we meet with them for a focused meeting with the leadership monthly, and then also have that CCAC meeting. But you've seen them come to board meetings and be able to talk through. They are a supportive group, and they're really exciting to work with. Next slide, please. Then engagement initiatives is that these are some areas that we've been able to expand and work through within our work. This is also supported through the CCIS. We understand that parent engagement and making sure that families have the resources they need can help with all of those other components related to significant disproportionality. So we have podcasts that are available for families, resource fairs, and family support groups. That was new this year. We've had support groups historically for our infants and toddlers, but we've been able to expand those up for school-aged. And then the other exciting thing about our support groups is we've been able to expand to a grandparents group, which has been starting to be more well attended. Focus supports for our multilingual families is really important. And it's something we've also been able to expand. Our family advisory committee, so our parent and community engagement supervisor, has several community member and families that she meets with to gain feedback as far as how we can better do this work. And then finally, community schools collaboration. So that's an area that we have really worked this year to expand in that collaboration with our community schools partners, and actually make sure not only, these same things that I'm talking about here with engagement initiatives, making sure that they're coming through that community school lens, who also, they are right there in communities, making sure they have the resources they need. Next slide, please. And then this is just kind of a summary of our family community touch points so far this year. And these have increased some because this is from a couple months ago, I guess about a month ago. But, just really positive numbers here as far as like what we're doing in order, we call those the touch points. 662 at that point supported individually, 348 community and agency contacts, training opportunities, outreach events, support groups. Again, these numbers are growing, but just kind of as a high level, kind of where we've been so far this year around this work. And the next slide, please. And really just want to thank you for the interest in this. We are excited about our work. We know that within our the Department of Special Education and the work around our significant disproportionality, we have a lot of work to do. We are making gains in some areas. What is exciting to me about I've coming into this role and seeing kind of how the funds, the requirement of spending those funds has been done differently over time. We have a really good team that is focused on how do we do this strategically so that we can build that infrastructure, build the kind of the muscle for the teams that are involved in this in order to then support also with the muscle in schools in order to be able to be flexible with regards to where we are. When I heard Mr. Handy talk about those multi-tiered systems in school buildings and how that matters with regards to addressing suspension, this is the work of these teams. This is the work of all of that. And whether that's placement or identification or suspension, the idea is that this infrastructure that I just kind of talked about is able to adjust where we see that need, where that data is showing, and kind of lean in more strategically around that. So again, thank you for the opportunity to talk about it, and would love to be able to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Board members, and are there any questions or comments for Ms. Myers?
Good afternoon. This is Mrs. Stileski.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for the presentation and for your dedication. I just had one question. For the parents that may be, on the meeting, and of course, any parent that can benefit from this.
Yeah.
In terms of, being aware of resources that they can access, and if they're feeling as though they're having any struggles with their child's, IEP or 504, like what suggestions would you
Call
like?
us.
Like, where would you like them to start in terms
Call
of?
us. Call us. I will direct to the website probably right now, and we're really excited about that. That's been recently some added drop downs on our website that actually both under. I'm going to navigate this while I'm on so I can actually give you, sorry, pause 1 second for me. So on our website under parents, actually, if they hover right on parents and go down to special education supports. Oh, thank you so much. That's awesome. There we go. So if you go to under parents and scroll all the way to the bottom, there is special education supports. If you scroll down under community, there we go. That takes you right to the Department of Special Education and Family Support Services. And in there, you click on Start Now. And it tells you, gives this form when they click really quickly are able to then identify what are the need that they have, and then for us to be able to get in touch. And it goes all the way down, and just a few information questions, and then falls under the following category. What are they looking for? Is there a question? If they need an interpreter, that's identified. This is also in Spanish as far as the form, and then they're able to submit. They also can call us at any point. So if the other point back on the website is if they don't see it under the parents, if you scrolled down to the bottom of the site, overall, we are now one of the little there under the still can't find what you're after, we're there as well. So that was new within the last couple of months, and we've actually seen an increase in access, which is great. But we say if you really feel that you're not able, we want folks to be able to go to their school teams, of course. But if they're not able to gain that, direct support from the school for whatever reason, is please reach out to our office. And the whole purpose of this family support team is being able to navigate concerns with families and then be able to get them the resources they need. And ultimately, we'll work with the school, with the family, to ensure that we're able to be able to get whatever that concern is met. So yeah, thank you for navigating that, Erin. That's fantastic.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Hi, this is the student member, Ms. Chikikalu. I had a question. Yes, thank you so much for this presentation and just for the work that's being done. And so I guess my first question was kind of just around community engagement. So for like multilingual families and just for kind of the historically marginalized families, with participating in IAP and resource events, do you kind of know which strategies have been the most effective in outreach and is still kind of keeping them engaged in that process despite any language barrier or other barriers?
Yeah, so we actually have a Spanish-speaking staff member who is on our team. So she really focuses on reaching out to that community. And we've been really deliberate about having things in both Spanish and English. In addition to that, we really work with interpreters and collaborate with our the various offices for support to ensure that we are able to kind of be able to focus in and get folks at this in the spaces that are able to help with either interpreting or that we know specific family needs. Some of our work with our birth of 5 community or our infants and toddlers, they're in homes. So that's been something we've really worked with over the years to ensure that we know our communities, know the community needs, know some cultural aspects of things. Done a lot of work with Doug's team with our infants and toddlers providers. We want to make sure that we're meeting families where they are with their identified needs and meeting them culturally and being responsive to that. We work with our welcome center pretty regularly. We actually have a child find center that's in the same space as our welcome center. So we just kind of, we look at it multifaceted as far as being able to do that. And then we have schools that reach out in particular that know they may have a specific need in population, have reached out to us to say, how do we navigate this? Supporting with interpreters, supporting with using that talk space has been great. We've really kind of worked with schools to be able to use that with our families also. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, but just I feel like it's a multifaceted approach to being able to get folks the resources they need. And if for some reason a school identifying they have a group that's not, then we'll work with them to be able to do that.
No, you did very well. Thank you so much for your answer. And then I remember at another Board of Education presentation, we kind of heard how they were still supporting kids outside of graduation or like their post-secondary work. And so I was kind of wondering, do we kind of track those outcomes for students with IEPs or who may have received special education services and like just how it compares to their peers?
Yeah, so there are some measures that I mean, it's definitely a tracked area. I don't have that data in front of me. It's an area as far as us, again, part of our strategic roadmap is really building out those 18 to 21 services. So we know we talk about college community, career college and community ready, meaning that, that community aspect for some of our kiddos is really critical. Some of our friends are going to college, some of our kids are getting ready for the workforce, and some are working towards other kind of life skill opportunities. So that's an area that we definitely continue to lean in and build out and grow, which is exciting, and continues to be an area that, like all of our things, but continues to be an area that needs work, but that we're continuing to grow and build out. As far as the actual outcomes, we do, the graduation rate continues to be an area that we focus with, that we definitely need to focus on for students receiving special education services as well.
Thank you so much. And then is there a way just for like students who are still receiving these services or particularly like pull-out services, is there a way to kind of measure the actual student experience of like belonging outside of placement, especially for like Black and multilingual learners receiving special education services?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say our climate survey looks to be able to capture that for all students. Disaggregating that by special education is not something that's currently been done for specifically down to students, right? I think it's one of the areas that I think it's something that we continue to work on with regards to how our case managers are ensuring they're leaning into our students to ensure how are they feeling about that? Are they accessing? I don't know, to be honest with you, that I have a really great measurement point to speak to on that, but I would say that just should be part of the work of both our transition facilitators. I'm kind of speaking more to high school and in that 14 up range, but transition facilitators working directly with students on how they are accessing, what their interests are, how we can ensure that we're getting them ready for, again, college, career, and community, or their case manager, and just ensuring that it are the needs that we've identified in the IEP reflective of what the student thinks their needs are. They should be part of an active participant of part of that process for the IEP team. And part of why that's critical is that, just kind of to your point, if they're receiving services, let's say outside of gen ed in this small group, and are feeling that that's not meeting their needs. And we have kids that have been really vocal. I don't want to be outside. I want to be with my peers. How do we support them to be able to do so? So again, it's one of those things that I think there's several ways to do it, but I think it's an area we could continue to definitely lean into as far as getting, actual student kind of like thoughts around that in a more measured way.
Thank you so much. And I was just kind of wondering, like for slides 11 through 12 with engagement and touch points, are there any student-centered events where like youth receiving those services can connect or also have that community building aspect, like you mentioned, outside of their schoolhouse?
That's really been school-based, as far as opportunities within schools. That's not something that I'm recalling. I'm racking my head right now. You got me on that one. I don't believe there's anything that central office-wise that we facilitate with regards to students outside. We do a lot of, again, it's like the parent side of engagement. I like that idea, and I don't, you're going to get me thinking on that one. But right now, I'd say that that's more of a schoolhouse site to site as far as how they're engaging in different activities. One of the areas of focus for us is that extracurricular involvement and wanting for our students receiving special education services to have increased opportunity for that. And I would see that being kind of one of those areas we can lean into to see, whether that's cross school or something else. So, I like that idea. If you have if you want to talk about that or share it, please reach out.
No, absolutely, I know. And then on that front with extracurriculars, I was just also, I've been a lot of wondering, I know, but I was wondering for extracurriculars, do they also have just opportunity to also gain more leadership opportunities within those extracurriculars where they can still engage with other students? So peer mentoring, advisory councils, student panels, or just other avenues for leadership beyond participation?
Nothing structured. I think, and here's the thing I'll say is that the important part is that our students receiving special ed services, our general education services, our students first, general ed students first. So the same opportunities that we have for any other student, we want for our students receiving special ed services. We know that for some of our students, they may need some support with advocacy in order to step into those spaces differently. And I think that's an area that, whether that's through the guidance counselor, the transition facilitator, the case manager, a mentor teacher, a friend, is that what are those kind of ways that we work on advocacy efforts, especially as they're getting older, to say, okay, yes, you have, this level of need, or is identified that this may be something that could be identified as a barrier, and flip that to say, okay, but then as a strength, this is how we can then navigate that. So, again, nothing formal, but I also want to be really clear with our community that all opportunities for our general education students are also opportunities for students receiving special ed services. They may need different supports to access those, but something that there's not a limit. And I think that's really important when we think about leadership opportunities, is if that's something that, a family feels like their child would benefit from, or a student's interested in, we want to be able to work with that team to ensure appropriate access.
No, thank you so much. That makes a lot of sense. And then I think for my last question, I was just wondering, for schools with the COUS program or like magnet tracks, I know from my experience, is there a way for us to kind of intentionally socialize the students? Because I think I haven't had as much of an opportunity to engage with the COUS students or students receiving any special education services as robustly as I would want to. So I just want to ensure that they still have those opportunities to engage within the same community.
Yeah, and I think, that what's kind of where we go to that those schoolhouse efforts, working with school teams, working with principals, working, on inclusive efforts, wanting to say, what are those opportunities? We talk a lot about, ensuring, again, that's extracurricular, ensuring our kids have access to the prom, have access to, what are we doing homecoming time? What are we doing during, pep rallies, etc. I think, we can be deliberate with those efforts. A lot of that is schoolhouse based and something we'll continue to work with teams on. But I agree with you. I think there's always opportunity for increased efforts, and depending on school to school as far as what you see, as far as engagement efforts and what that looks like.
No, thank you. Just thank you for taking the time to answer my questions and for the presentation and the work being done. Those were all of my questions I had.
Of course. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Chike Kalu. This is board member from Pong. Thank you, Ms. Myers, for the presentation and for the great information. There's a lot of, um, not just data, but information and trends. I think that's in that information that you've presented that can help, like you said, that's guiding your work. You talked about CCAC, and I love that you were talking about working on more about having that collaborative effort with them. And I know they're a group of parents that's very involved, and they have things set up where it's the first Monday of the month, and they're meeting and talking about these things. And um, as you work on that collaboration with them, I guess my question is, because then that's like the community members, the parents themselves. What insights and perspectives would you say that you've gained from working with them, and how have you, I guess, been able to incorporate that into the work that you guys are doing in special education?
That's a fantastic question. I'll say the biggest thing I feel like that was part of our I call it like an aha as the year was unfolding this year with a newer group, was that there was a disconnect between us saying we're doing these things and them not realizing that what we were doing, which then helped us kind of from it. We talk about some of that's just it's a PR kind of move, right? It's the public relations. How are we getting what we're doing to families? The other component, so we've talked about that. Like we could say we're having parent resource fair. We want them to support us with promoting that in addition to our communications team, who's been really helpful with us in that. The other thing that's been kind of that's come of it is they were getting a lot of phone calls from families as the kind of that was the point of family would have a need, they would go to CCAC, and then CCAC was trying to navigate supporting the family. And for us to be able to say, listen, we're partners in this. Please send them to us. Please let us help. And really trying to be able to bridge that kind of, I'm not going to call it a gap, but just bridge like an information kind of avenue of being able to say that we know that them to be able to feel comfortable sending families to us and families getting what they need. And I think that was a trust component that we're continuing to build. We've really focused on that supervisor for parent community engagement, that they feel comfortable if the parent comes to a CCAC member or sends an email and it gets sent to our parent group, that we're very responsive. We want to make sure that parents are getting the information they need or getting to the person who can answer that question. So I think those are my two. I think around the promotion of what we're doing and making sure that it's landing with the right people. We've talked about when surveys being one way of gathering. We've even seen in that sometimes families aren't indicating they know what's out there. So that's just been continuing to build out that kind of communications aspect of things. And then also, that other one wanting to share and continue to build out that trust so that they know they can refer back to the department and the department's able to meet the needs of the families. The other thing I'll say is that the importance of that there are free kind of advocacy groups and things that we also will refer families to. So if their Parent Place of Maryland is a great example of that we work collaboratively with. So if it's something that a parent is struggling with something in particular and they reach out, we may connect them with that group as far as with supporting for resources. So that was something CCAC was doing. We were doing it tandemly. So it was kind of one of those funny things of trying to streamline our efforts, but also being able to be really clear that we're speaking the same language and wanting to support students and families.
Great, thank you. And I don't know if we said what CCAC is. I'll just go ahead.
Yeah, our Special Ed Citizens Advisory Committee. So they are a group of families that provide advisement with regards to special education, what the needs are of families, what they're seeing, and make recommendations to us about how we can support families differently. You want to add to that, Ms. Frumpong? I mean, it's jump for you.
Nope. I think it's a fantastic resource for parents and for students. And so some of what you had said, it also and what's kind of coming out through this presentation, and then even actually yesterday with meeting or hearing from the students, and it is kind of like awareness. And so the thing sometimes that saddens me is when I hear about all of these different resources that BCPS is providing, people are pouring into and investing in. And the idea is that it's supposed to support our students, our parents, the families, and communities. But the people who are supposed to benefit from it do not even realize that it exists.
Mhm.
And so that is, to me, such a, it's missed opportunities there. And so, can you talk about, I guess, the communication? And again, I speak, like I said yesterday, just hearing from the students, and it was sad sometimes. They're thinking and talking about certain things and not understanding that there's resources available for them to use and to get support. And so with marketing, you'll hear that sometimes it takes like a minimum of 7 touch points or 7 times to hear something before people may even be
Mhm.
aware. So that's why you always see that repetition, repetition, repetition.
Mhm.
So can you talk about then the communication efforts, um, and the multifaceted perspective, say how are we trying to touch the parents and the students and the families just in different ways to make sure that they're aware of these resources and supports that are available to them?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great question to talk about because I feel like it's one of the areas we continue to want to grow in. And honestly, with that is that we work really closely with our Office of Communications, and you'll see on different social media platforms as far as having any level of activity that we have going on. We have emails when folks are part of an email address list and like kind of a listserv type of idea that comes both from we have a birth to 5 group, we have a school age group for that. We do have our Padlet, which is something that we've actually included on everyone's signature line as far as our IEP chairs and facilitators. We've asked that be on their signature line for the Padlet so that families can see that and to highlight for families that it's there. Because that then within that Padlet has a ton of information for families upcoming, whether that's the newsletter. The newsletter is shared through our communications office as well, but that's on the Padlet also for families. We share monthly with principals and with IEP chairs and facilitators our special education updates, which is like a newsletter in essence, and has a parent and family engagement portion of that with the links for upcoming activities for families that we do ask that schoolhouses then share with families. Um, Gosh, as far as like child find and out things like that, as far as because we also have that community outreach aspect that you may see things even in pediatricians' offices or in libraries or in churches around that if you need support and you think your child has a need, it gives that child find hotline. That's and the daycare providers. We work with our early childhood on office also in collaboration with looking at community providers for both pre-K, but we also have kiddos that receive special education services that are out in community preschools that as part of their infant and toddler their that service plan. So, Ms. Franco, it's one of those areas that we continue to think about and want to expand on what are the other ways to get to those folks that you're talking about, because as soon as we find an opportunity, we're in there, right? Like that was the community schools. We were like, yes, this is great. They had give a contact. Let's lean into that. We're actually working with Towson University on an opportunity for one of our schools right now that may want to pilot an idea of how do we build this community structure and then be able to build that out from other schools. So really kind of, again, it's multifaceted, and that whole team's focus and all of ours is getting to families. So if folks have other ideas, we'll take them because we really want to be able to get to who get the resources to who needs it, get those resources to our kiddos and go from there. I hope that helped, that answered your question. I don't know that it did.
Thank you. It does. And I appreciate that, speaking about what you're doing, but also understanding, that there's more that can be done, but you guys are committed to this work. That's what I hear when you're
Okay.
talking about that. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
And then the last thing, it was very interesting to hear you say it. And so, can you speak to cultural responsiveness? I noticed that you spoke about that, and I was pleased
Yeah.
to hear that. So can you speak more to like what that means and how that works and how
Yeah.
you see that, affecting students with special education or any type of, even just proportionality itself?
Just student needs. Yeah. So, I think there's often, depending on folks, histories, backgrounds, cultures, how they show up in the world, different feelings around special education. Whether that's from their own experience, from a family member, from society, whatever, and really wanting to be able to lean into that with families to meet them where they are, and that, take that stigma away if that's the case. And we'll say that it goes on both ends, right? That some may feel that in order to get their students' needs met of any level, it needs to be through special education, and not wanting to go with maybe a student support team process, versus those that are really apprehensive about special education and not wanting to identify their child and not want to label their child, because you'll hear that also. As far as our infants and toddlers work that I'm talking about, and really knowing that when that is a very intimate setting, as far as our infants and toddlers work, we're meeting families in the homes where they are. So you're coming into their space and we're working on strategies that fall within their normal, natural environment. And that's a huge component of that work in infants and toddlers is, we don't want to put let's say, my perspective on how I might raise my child on someone else. So it's what are those things that you have found that you do within your daily living, and what are the strategies we can do within that to be able to support the need that's been identified for that child and for their child. Parents are part of that process on purpose. Infants and toddlers, it's a family focused process because parents are part of that work. And I think that part of that cultural responsiveness around knowing the culture of a family and how that's important and how that plays out, and being very, I say, responsive to that, respectful of that, and in wanting to ensure that as we're supporting kids, you're going to get further with our kiddos and providing those early intervention services, doing that in collaboration with and supporting our families. So that's really what that means on that end. And I feel I could really talk about this for a long time, but I'm hoping that kind of highlighted and answered a bit for you. Push back if you need more.
No, it did. Thank you. And again,
Okay.
I think it was a great opportunity you didn't know I was going to ask you about that. But again, as you talked about the work, that
Yeah.
is something that came up, and
It's
I think
huge.
it's important that people hear what that
Mhm.
means and how that actually plays out in real world situation.
Yeah,
So
of
thank you.
course.
All right. Board members, are there any other questions? All right. So thank you so much, Ms. Myers. Thank you, Mr. Handy, for the presentations and information that you presented to us today. Um, the last item on the agenda is announcements. And so the next Equity Committee meeting is scheduled for Thursday, May 8th, 2025 at 4 p.m. And the next Equity Committee meeting with the Equity Council is scheduled for Thursday, May 22nd, 2025 at 5:30 p.m. So is there any further business? Okay. Hearing none, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you for joining us and have a good evening.
Have a good
Thank
evening.
you.
Take care,
Good night,
everyone.
everybody.